From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Okay, well, we'll begin with some reporting coming out of The Guardian and Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera, most importantly, because this story affects journalists at Al Jazeera. So let's jump right into it. The headline is, Al Jazeera journalist hacked using Israeli firm's spyware. Here's the subtitle here. Watchdog suspects Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates of being behind hacking of 36 journalists earlier this year. Wow. Now, this news essentially, like it says on the front there, several dozen journalists were the target of specific spyware that gets into your phone. And it's a spyware that is known as Pegasus. It is created by a company called NSO Group. These are just some proper nouns that you're going to need to know for this story. NSO Group, if you go to them, you're wondering, well, what is this Pegasus and NSO Group? You can jump over to an Amnesty International article here that was posted in 2019 when the spyware Pegasus was in the news before. Last year, the software was found in a couple of other places. That's a whole different story. But this is what we'll tell you about the NSO Group and the Pegasus spyware. NSO Group is an Israeli manufacturer of software, things like spyware. Generally, and at least according to them, they sell these tools to governments and to government agencies to, quote, combat terror and crime. So the concept is NSO Group would create this thing, send it over to somebody who is being targeted by whatever government because this person they believe that this person is a bad actor in some way. Generally, at least according to the government's stance, depending on which one you're talking to, this person is probably engaging in some kind of terror activity or anti-government activity. The problem is Pegasus and other NSO Group software has been misused multiple times. And this Pegasus software and some other software created by NSO Group has been used multiple times to conduct what is considered unlawful surveillance on people who do not pose some kind of imminent threat to a government or citizens. In the past, it's been used to target Amnesty International staff, at least one member that was known, several other activists, several journalists from multiple countries, Mexico, Morocco, Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. And
even clergy in Togo, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And it's one of those things where essentially NSO Group could give this or license this software to some government, and then that government could be using it improperly, or some actor within a government could be using it improperly. We talk about that a lot with the CIA and FBI and other intelligence agencies where there's maybe a cell within that organization that is doing something improperly, or at least outside of the terms within the license agreement, let's say. So what is Pegasus specifically? How does it get into your phone? Generally, at least in 2019, when there was a bit of an outbreak there or there was known misuse of it, it was using the app WhatsApp, and it was essentially an SMS message that was sent to a user that was then clicked on, and then the spyware gets into a phone. With this instance, with Al Jazeera, it was a no-click situation where the end user, the target, didn't have to click on a darn thing. It just got onto their phones. Well, okay, so spyware is on your phone. Let's say you're a journalist who was targeted there at Al Jazeera. What does this thing do? Well, Pegasus can log keystrokes. That's one thing. So anything you type into your phone, any app you're using, anything you're doing on your phone, it can see that. It can take control of your phone's camera and microphone, and it can access contact lists. And here's the big one. especially for journalists who are discussing, very secretive, sometimes things, very sensitive subjects with people they're trying to protect, sources they're trying to keep in the dark, essentially, so that they don't get targeted. It can access encrypted messages on a phone. That's a big, big deal. And that's scary because it endangers other people who could be, across the globe, somewhere else, some source. Ben, I just this really freaks me out. Just as, two guys who talk about things that I know there are a lot of groups out there that probably wish we weren't talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
It really does freak me out a little bit. How does all of this make you feel, and what do you think about all this?
It's difficult to know when these were discovered. We know when the researchers at Citizen Lab discovered it, because their whole thing is transparency. But I would say all your points about journalists and sources ring true. I mean, it's a continual conflict between governments and between reporters, between the media. When we talk about protecting sources, it turns out multiple governments are all about it until it doesn't align with their interest. And that applies to democratic governments as well as authoritarian ones. One thing that really stands out to me about this is if we trace I'm tracing lines on my palm.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I'm watching.
But no, I wasn't doing it on camera either. I was just looking at my hand. Anyway, if we trace the lines of motivation and ownership, then we see this as a reflection of, or an iteration rather, of a larger pattern, which is that Saudi Arabia and the UAE have some beef with, not just with Al Jazeera, but with Qatar, where Al Jazeera is based. And Al Jazeera does have, at times, a Qatari bias. It's been heavily criticized for this. It's also, of course, like any Middle Eastern-based non-Israel news outlet, it's been accused of anti-Semitism, of course, and it's been accused of being very pro-Qatar in general, right? So I would see an attack on journalists working for Al Jazeera. I would see that in a way as an attack on Qatar, or attack on at least an arm of itself. The official Al Jazeera version, by the way, is that they are independent and that they're not poisoning the well when it comes to their reporting. But so that's my first thing. I think you're absolutely right, and I think there's something bigger at play here, and I think we'll probably hear more news coming out in 2021 about what this attack led to. Like, what was the motivation? Because it seems as though, it's weird when you think about it. Despite their differences in religion, Israel and Saudi Arabia want a lot of the same things. They want Iran out of the picture. They want to be the hegemons of the region, So I think many people in the West might be surprised by just how often these groups, or as you said, factions of these groups, cells of these groups, team up for common cause. Doesn't mean they're friends. Just means they team up when they need to.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting strategy if these attacks, cyber attacks, whatever you want to, infiltrations, are truly coming from United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, because it's not fully known. The group that put out the report, Citizen Lab, they have some key findings that I'm going to go through just from their own reporting. In July and August of 2020, this is when the Pegasus spyware went into the journalists' phones. They're all iPhones, by the way. They're all Apple products. I was saying before that WhatsApp was the way that Pegasus got onto phones previously in 2019, and then I mentioned the no-click version that occurred this time with Al Jazeera. Well, That's because it wasn't WhatsApp. It was Apple iMessage that was used to infiltrate these phones. And the people that they identified, the operators, Citizen Lab has given them code names rather than identifying information. And again, we've talked about this before. It's difficult to know precisely where an attack is coming from when you're dealing with something online, because IP addresses can be changed and spoofed. There's lots of information that can be altered and lots of tricky routes that information can take to where, in a purposeful way, to prevent someone from knowing who it is and where it's coming from. So they called one of these operators Monarchy. Citizen Lab has attributed them to Saudi Arabia. Another is codenamed Sneaky Kestrel, a wonderful little bird. They are attributing them to United Arab Emirates. And there's something that slightly goes over my head, but there's an exploit chain that they are referring to as Kismet that is an invisible zero-click exploit within Apple's iMessage. And this was a zero-day exploit in iOS 13.5.1. And it's so funny because really the only way to prevent yourself from being hacked with this Pegasus is to just update to the latest version, because that zero-day exploit goes away or is fixed, in theory, with the update. And then there is certainly another one that is going to exist within the update that then has to be found by someone who wants to attack a phone. And the cycle continues.
Yeah, right. Cue Circle of Life. Can we afford the rights to that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, everybody imagine Circle of Life playing then. Let's do it that way. You're absolutely right, Matt. The thing about this zero-click vector, what this means in layman's terms is that the hack is a lot like an accident on a crowded interstate. You as the driver, or you as the user of your mobile device, could be doing everything right. You could be using the correct kind of proxies and safeguards. You could be the kind of person who doesn't tend to download things in general. The fault is not yours, we should say to the Al Jazeera journalist and to other victims of these exploits. The fault is one of software, right? So unless you made the software that's running on your phone, this really isn't on you. And I would say to that cycle of updating an iOS and then updating the hack or the exploit, the only real 100% solution to that is to not have an iPhone.
Yeah.
But that's not really helpful information though, because it's like all those, for anybody who went to public school in the US, it's like all those terrible, the no sex is the only safe sex messages.
Hey, I follow those rules. I'm okay with that.
Oh man. I remember back in, just a personal anecdote, back in it must have been early high school or something. Even our PE teacher who was forced to teach us that thought it was ridiculous. She kept throwing in these little lines like, the government requires me to read the following out loud.
That's funny.
Yeah,
funny.
but she also never tried to hack anybody's phone that we know of.
It is true. Someone can literally send you an Evite for a Mean Girls party, and you could get infected. It doesn't matter. I mean, there are so many ways to get into your phone as a vector. It's ridiculous. So I'm not saying no phone is the right way to go, or abstinence. I'm not saying choose abstinence. I'm just saying be aware, and have at least 3 phones. So you should be good
at all times. There's actually, it's weird. There was a Chinese manufacturer for a while, I think we may have talked about this, who created phones that had 2 separate SIM cards so that, well, basically, I think, so that people could sneak around TLC style and not get caught. So they had to burn her number.
Creep a bit?
Yes. Dare we say, just a creep. But there's something else here I think we should add that I want to be clear on without getting too in the weeds of geopolitics. So Al Jazeera is important. Whether you love it or hate it, it's important because a lot of media in this part of the world, in the Middle East, is state-run. And that means that they're relaying officially approved things, even if those things are misleading, even if those are untrue, even if they're not the whole story. Al Jazeera is, according to its supporters, able to get around that, despite, the accusations of Qatari bias. But why do we say it's an attack on Qatar? Maybe I was being a little unfair to Israel. There are these 4 countries that cooperate. This is in the Citizen Lab paper, which is available online. These 4 countries in the Middle East, in a burst of creativity, call themselves the 4 countries. And they, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt, they ally pretty closely on certain things. But they don't like Qatar because they feel like Qatar shelters dissidents from these 4 countries. So if you have a problem with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, according to these countries, is going to allow you to hide out there. So on their end, this kind of hack is maybe more like getting intel on people they consider criminals or terrorists. But, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter sometimes.
Yeah. Well, the reason this was found out is because there was an investigative journalist named Tamer al-Mishal who got a death threat on his phone. He thought something was strange, took his phone to Citizen Lab and just said, "Hey, what's going on here?" Found out that he was a target. Then when they tracked the spyware itself and where it was being deployed essentially and realized, oh, wow, Al Jazeera is just rife with this thing. That's how they figured it out, because this one journalist was like, something's going on. And that's all it took.
Yeah. Also, shout out to Tamer, because I don't know if you saw this, Matt. He hosts a pretty popular show on Al Jazeera's Arabic channel. And the title of the program translates to something like, "This is only the tip of the iceberg," or "What is hidden is more immense." So I think this is our people, honestly.
Dude, and that's such a good name. What is hidden is more immense. Oh,
Arabic is so poetic, dude.
Beautiful.
So he has kind of a stuff they don't want you to know show in spirit.
But on, an actual journalism outlet.
Yeah, that's true. And congratulations to him. But what we see here, I don't know, in my opinion, it makes me wonder what's next.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? When things like this get uncovered, and this is an iteration of a strategy that's been deployed, as we established numerous times in the past, when things like this get uncovered, our next question is, how do they evolve? What's next? Because I'll tell you what, man, the government of Saudi Arabia is, well, I don't know a better way to put it. They're on some real fuck around and find out stuff, and they have been for a few years, and they're getting away with it. And it doesn't matter what your political leanings are. Journalists are not supposed to be dismembered.
No.
Or if someone is attacked like that, there are supposed to be consequences.
Yeah, exactly.
And those consequences are either delayed or non-existent.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous game, going after journalists for a country, for a government. It's very dangerous because you're risking such public backlash in making those, citizens a target. And yet it doesn't prevent governments from taking that action, and it hasn't prevented them from doing that. But yeah, we're putting you on notice, governments. don't. Oh God, just kidding. Whatever. Oh God.